Al Jazeera Podcasts.
History teaches us that genocide is a process, not a single act. It starts with the dehumanization of a group as other and the denial of that group's humanity, and ends with the destruction of the group in whole or in part. The dehumanization of Palestinians as a group is the hallmark of their history of ethnic cleansing, dispossession, and apartheid.
That's Francesca Albanese, UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territory. She is one of the most powerful voices when it comes to reporting on the human rights situation in Palestine. And yet, her role as an independent expert has become increasingly difficult. She believes that world leaders are choosing political expediency over their obligations in international law. So, I want to know, when you're at the epicenter of an international crisis and one of the greatest challenges facing your life and career, how do you get people to listen? I'm Samantha Johnson, and this is Now You Know, a new series from Al Jazeera dedicated to amplifying women's voices, stories, and topics we're all thinking and talking about. This is a safe space where we go all in, so by the end of each episode, you can say, "Now I know." Speaking about Israel's war on Gaza at the Human Rights Council, Ms. Albanese presented her fourth report on the occupied Palestinian territory. She called it the anatomy of a genocide. Ms. Albanese says she has witnessed the worst that humanity is capable of, and that the core function of the United Nations has been questioned. She's also received personal threats. So, with that, I just want to say a huge thank you to Miss Francesca Albanese for joining us on Now You Know.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Now, earlier I'd said that you believe that world leaders are choosing political expediency over their obligations in international law. What does that exactly mean?
The situation in the occupied Palestinian territory is one marked by profound illegality. For the past 57 years, Israel has maintained an occupation on the pretext of security that has, in fact, frustrated and prevented the realization of the right of self-determination of the Palestinian people, which is, in essence, the ability to live together on the land that remains of their historical homeland, which means today the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the East Jerusalem as a people, free to determine themselves politically, economically. Israel has built colonies after colonies for Jews only. Israel has applied military rule, martial law for 57 years, which has led to forced displacement, mass incarceration, often extrajudicial killings. Because, of course, this oppressive regime of dispossession has caused resistance from the Palestinians. So for 57 years, this system has been in violation of international law through and through. And in the face of this, instead of enforcing international law, including UN resolutions, UN General Assembly resolutions and Security Council resolutions, International Court of Justice decisions, the international community has let impunity fester, has let Israel go on with its violations without ever ensuring an inch of accountability. And this is the reality we have today. The collapse of civil order in Gaza, the destruction of Gaza, also epitomizes the breaking down of the international system.
You've held this position since 2022. What's changed since then?
The situation has gone dramatically worse since the beginning of 2022 for the Palestinians under occupation, and this coincides with the new government coalition led by Benjamin Netanyahu, but also consisting of the most extreme right-wing politicians the Israeli political landscape has ever had. And we have seen an intense application of the annexation plan. And annexation is illegal. It amounts to a crime under international law. Annexation of Palestinian land, displacing Palestinians living there in order to make space for Jewish Israelis only. we have seen this acceleration. We have seen an increase in the use of force, an excessive force against the Palestinians. I always say, look, before October 7, 460 Palestinians had been killed during the 16 months I had been a special rapporteur, and during the same period, 60 Israelis had been killed. So the situation was violent, and of course it was more violent for the Palestinians, kept under oppression, but it had escalated with the new government. The situation was clearly near to a point of collapse, and now we are really to that precipice.
Tell me, Francesca, how did world leaders react to your work before Israel's war on Gaza and after October the 7th?
Look, I don't think that things have substantively changed in terms of positioning of countries toward my mandate or opposition. In the sense, Israel has never recognized this mandate, and there have been 7 special rapporteurs on the occupied Palestinian territory before me. I'm the 8th and the first woman on this position. And the United States have never recognized it either, never extended cooperation. And this, with me, because I'm probably more vocal, I'm also more audible on social media, Israel has become more violent. But this is also a reflex of Israel becoming more violent against the Palestinians and against anyone who utters a word in solidarity with the Palestinians and with the Israelis who work with the Palestinians to bring down the apartheid. This is not a fight between the Palestinians and the Israelis. This is a fight where both people have to decolonize themselves. But of course, European countries have always been supportive of this mandate. Things have changed dramatically after October 7. And the relationships between this mandate and countries like France and Germany have clamorously deteriorated. I've been attacked and harassed in an unprecedented way. I'm insulted, offended, and slandered every other day with senior officials of these governments from Israel to the US and France and Germany as an anti-Semite, which frankly, for me, as a European, anti-Semitism remains the most disgusting and revolting forms of racism. Because again, as a European, I deeply resent what we have done to our fellow citizens or the Jewish people in Europe. So I do have a huge sense of responsibility because of that, I recognize racism against other groups as well. So being accused of anti-Semitism because of trying to save lives, I mean, Israel is butchering the Palestinians as we speak, including children. They've killed 17,000 children in Gaza alone. And the simple fact of explaining the root causes, where it comes from and what Israel is doing, leads me to be accused of anti-Semitism. So the situation is much worse than it was before October 7.
But the fact is, you are just doing your job and you are still getting targeted. Can you tell us what other obstacles you face?
Look, I don't want to complain because I think that the people on the ground are the ones who endure the most acute challenges. I mean, Palestinians right now are being exterminated. And for once, I understand what they have warned us against for decades. What they have felt was happening to them is materializing in the most clear and explicit fashion. Israeli political, military, and religious leaders, together with other segments of the Israeli society, are calling for the full eradication of Palestinian identity from the land that remains for them. The Israeli state is trying everything it can to push the Palestinian out, and because they don't want to leave, because for indigenous people, the land is not the place where they live, it's who they are, and so for the Palestinians, it's tough to leave that place. They don't want to leave that place. Mm-hmm. So yes, I do my job. The challenges are to see what's happening, to see the brutality of it, to see the brutality of the acts committed by young Israelis Of course, I have an enormous sadness because I do believe that when the Israelis will realize what they are doing, what they have done, it will be a total collapse for them. But again, we have a responsibility as an international community to help each other, including not to fan the flames of violence. The point is that Israel needs to recognize its own responsibilities and member states have to do the same. But here's the other sad reality. The challenge for me is the realization that we have a very immature and deceptive international community. They treat Israel as if it was untouchable, but why so? No one should be above the law. So, of course, these are the challenges I face the most. The fact that we have instruments at international level. We have international rules that would prevent, address, and grant accountability for the horrors that we are seeing. And still, because of political convenience, this is sacrificed, and we are all going to pay the consequences of it. We do not realize that today.
Well, how does that make you feel when the international community is not listening?
It's primarily the most influential member states in the international community, which are still Western states. As a Western citizen, I do regret this because we have had the possibility to influence the world for the better. And I don't say that with a white savior feeling, which I don't have at all. But again, because of our colonial history, which is a very dark page for many in the global south. So think of the US. Excuse me, the US is a country birthed from a genocide, was kept under an apartheid regime. So this is the country that today sort of justifying and enabling another genocide. So I think that there is a lot of atonement that Western societies have to make. Instead of seizing this opportunity, no, we are doubling down. This is something I regret. But bottom line, what I see being dominating is this system of financial, economic interests that link states one another, and they make choices that go against the will of their people. I've never seen in my life such a mobilization in support of Palestine, and it's cross-cutting and it's transnational in regards to students, but also workers and former civil servants or current civil servants who are stepping down. This is happening in different places at the same time, and still the system is dominated by political elites who are connected to financial elites, and it's impossible to crack this system. This is what pains me today.
I'd like us to go back to March of this year, and you delivered a report at the Human Rights Council about your work on Gaza. The report is called The Anatomy of a Genocide. What is the anatomy of a genocide?
Yeah, like the word itself says, anatomy is a view of the structure of what has happened particularly in Gaza, in the 5-6 months that preceded March 2024, where Israel had killed 30,000 people with a weaponry that was absolutely unsuitable for that kind of land, which was a heavily inhabited, one of the most populated places on Earth, without escape routes. And within the confines of the Gaza ghetto, Israel has forced hundreds of thousands and then millions into forced displacement. It has destroyed now between 80 and 90% of the civilian infrastructure by, again, violating basic rules of international humanitarian law, considering every Palestinian killable and every Palestinian civilian infrastructure targetable. And it has caused it has caused mass killing. It has caused the enormous physical and psychological harm. It has caused conditions of life that would lead to the destruction of the people. And these three acts constitute genocide if carried out with intent to destroy a group, national, ethnic, religious, or racial as such. So these are the criteria to have genocide. These criminal acts with the intent to destroy through this act. Now, there's been a lot of confusion in the debate regarding intent, and people say, yeah, but Israel didn't want to kill them all. Israel wanted to eradicate Hamas, wherever it is. Or Israel wanted to liberate their hostages. This doesn't matter. The motives are not relevant for international criminal law. Intent is eventually the mindset that leads to the destruction of the group in total in part. And it's not even necessary to have the completion of the entire destruction design. It's about the intent. And you can see clearly the intent. It has been said, it comes from the spoken word. The Palestinians have been identified as a nation responsible for what had happened on October 7, and therefore to be punished. And this is what the soldiers have done. There's been a genocidal call that has found hundreds of thousands of soldiers ready to turn themselves into willful executioners. This is the anatomy of a genocide. And Israel has realized this genocide by what I call in the report humanitarian camouflage, meaning it has distorted the meaning of international humanitarian law without denying the fact, just misqualifying the fact. Israel has never denied to have forcibly evacuated in 24 hours 1.1 million people. It has said, well, we've given evacuation orders. Otherwise, if they didn't move, they would be considered terrorists or accomplices to terrorists. So this jargon has confused everyone. And still, there are people defending the right of self-defense of Israel.
Do you believe that Israel has a right to exist?
Israel does exist. Israel is a recognized member of the United Nations. Besides this, there is not such a thing in international law like a right of a state to exist. What is enshrined in international law is the right of a people to exist. So the state is there, the state of Israel is there, is protected as a member of the United Nations. Does this justify the erasure of another people? Hell no.
So this is my analysis of the anatomy of Israel's genocide in Gaza.
This war on Gaza has been described as the first live-streamed genocide in history. Now, the Al Jazeera investigative unit has compiled a database of thousands of social media posts of Israeli soldiers live streaming various violations like what appears to be the murder of unarmed civilians and the use of human shields. It looks like they're acting carte blanche, like they're just doing whatever they want and sharing openly what they want and what they're doing without any consequences. As a lawyer, what do you think when you see these images? Are any international laws being broken?
When there are atrocity crimes, it's impossible. It's materially impossible to deliver full justice because so many lives necessarily get lost and so much destruction and devastation is brought that you can't really compensate for that. You cannot restore what has been broken in terms of family lives and bonds and the trauma that these 2.3 million Palestinians will carry on. It will be hard for the Palestinians to recover easily, let alone how can Gaza be rebuilt in a way, because Gaza is destroyed. But I was thinking, Samantha, when you asked the question, have the soldiers been allowed to do what they wanted? I can't say, because maybe they would have done something worse. The point is that it's clear that crimes after crimes after crimes after crimes have been committed, but I do see the links, the trends, the scale, the nature, the patterns of violence that suggest a clear policy to mass murder, to exterminate. Genocide, it's a very complicated and complex crime to identify because of how difficult it is to prove intent. But here it's pretty ostentatious. And the thing is that you cannot analyze crime by crime as if they were disconnected. It should all be seen as part of the same conduct, state conduct, because the government in Israel, the parliament, the judiciary have either actively or because of omission contributed to this climate. Never once accountability has been delivered, including for the famous case of rape against the Palestinians under detention. So these are crimes, and considered all together, they depict a picture of mass destruction that is genocidal, because the Palestinians have only that land, and without that land, they are destroyed as a people.
October the 20th, you posted on X, "In Gaza, the collective shame of the century continues unabated and unstopped in defiance of every norm of international law and morale." Now, the statement continues, "The United Nations, once a believed beacon of hope and a force for peace, are crumbling under the weight of this shame and the pressure of this inaction or complicity of its most powerful member states." You must have felt quite discouraged when you wrote that. Do you feel like you're not being heard here?
No, I think I'm hurt. And this is why I'm slandered so badly, and vilified all the time. I mean, it's horrible to have your reputation completely trashed by, frankly, I cannot comment on how the sense of respect I've lost for people who call themselves diplomats, who have turned diplomacy into an empty function to cover up for crimes. But yeah, I do feel discouraged because, again, I say, I mean, I would like to shake these people and say, "What are you doing? I mean, we will miss human rights very much when we don't have them anymore. How can you enforce an international system which is supposed to be universal if it turns into rights for some or justice for some and injustice for others? Rights when they belong only to a group, they're no longer rights, they're privileges." There have been other genocides that should have been prevented. The difference here is that it's being broadcast by its very victims, and journalists have been killed for reporting on what was happening, Palestinian journalists. And I say, what kind of monsters have we become if not only we see that and we do not react, but also we continue to enable the state, which is responsible for all this. I'm not blaming Israelis for feeling hurt because of what they have suffered on October 7th. Rather, the contrary, I've condemned the crimes that have been committed against Israeli civilians. But I've said, do you understand the hate that might germinate in someone's heart when they lose family members and they get violated in the intimacy of their daily life by someone else? Because this is how the Palestinians might feel toward you, because they've suffered at the hand of the Israelis humiliation and indignities and deprivations for decades. October 7th should have been a moment to embrace wisdom and compassion. And no, it's been pure revenge. After that, the ICJ advisory opinion, which declares what we have said all along, that Israel's occupation is unlawful and should be removed. And instead of enforcing it, I see member states and their spokespersons coming up with excuses saying, well, but it's not very binding. No, it's very binding. And it's premised upon customary international law, like the prohibition of acquisition of territory by force, the prohibition of violating the right of self-determination, the prohibition of imposing regimes of racial discriminations or apartheid. Instead of enforcing this customary law, member states, Western states in particular, are making excuses and helping Israel. It's very disappointing, to say the least.
Well, speaking of member states, how can the United Nations rise above the individual positions of its member states?
Well, I do think, and this is probably where I'm hopeful, because the the system is of such a rupture. Also within Western states, you've seen how many people, especially young people, have led protests, encampments, have articulated their opposition on the grounds of moral principles, international law against the system. So this has generated a sort of seismic shift. Just started. So this is an opportunity to change the system from within. And I really like the fact that young generations are very capable and able to articulate the interconnection between social justice, environmental justice, the need to fight intergenerational trauma, and gender justice. They link everything together and they want a more just world. But this is what gives me hope. The possibility to change the system from within, but also from outside. The UN system, it's not conceived to advance peace and security. It's advanced to attain peace and security as status quo as it was prior to October 7. But after October 7, we are on uncharted territory. So it's not a given that the usual powerful state will win. It's not a given that they will lose. So it's up to us, we, the people who believe in the equality of all human rights and everyone's having the same rights and freedoms, to stand up for the advancement and the victory of justice. This is the struggle, and no one is useless. And I want to shake people's conscience and say, don't sit idle, just come and fight for a better tomorrow, which starts today by saving the Palestinians and the Israelis who stand in solidarity with them.
Miss Francesca Albanese, you are more than just your title. You are an inspiration. You're formidable. You're amazing. And I can't thank you enough for giving your time to us on Now You Know. I really appreciate you. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me and for the lovely work.
So now you know how one woman fights for justice, no matter the challenges. Thank you to Francesca Albanese for joining me today. And of course, a special thanks to you for watching and listening to Now You Know.